You know what's strangely exhausting? Accidentally bumping into a chair, and your first instinct is to say sorry. Someone else interrupts you, and somehow you apologize. You ask a perfectly reasonable question, send a follow up text, take up 2 extra seconds of silence in a conversation, and somewhere in your mind, a quiet alarm goes off that says, you should probably apologize for this. If that feels familiar, the interesting question is not just why you say sorry so often. It is why your nervous system seems to act as if your existence is a small inconvenience that constantly needs softening. Because people who apologize for everything are not usually doing it because they are dramatic, weak, or overly polite, and they are definitely not doing it for no reason. In psychology, habits that repeat this often usually have a hidden function. They protect something, they prevent something, they manage something, which means your constant apologies may be less about manners and more about survival. And once you start looking at it that way, a lot of things begin to make sense. The extra smile when you speak, the careful way you phrase disagreement, the reflex to explain yourself before anyone even questions you, the strange guilt that appears when you have needs, preferences, limits, or emotions, the feeling that if you are not easy, pleasant, accommodating, and harmless, something bad might happen. That pattern is not random. There is usually a hidden reason you apologize for everything, sometimes several, and most of them have very little to do with what is happening in the present moment. On the surface, apologizing looks simple. It looks like good social behavior. It looks mature. It looks considerate. And sometimes it is. A real apology can repair relationships, restore trust, and signal empathy. It is one of the healthiest social tools we have. But that is not what we are talking about here. We are talking about the kind of sorry that appears before you have done anything wrong, the kind that slips into your language so often that you barely hear it anymore. Sorry to bother you. Sorry, just one question. Sorry, I know this is silly. Sorry, I'm talking too much. Sorry, I'm probably overthinking. Sorry, can I sit here? Sorry, I didn't reply sooner. Sorry, I'm upset. Sorry, I exist in a way that might require space. That kind of apology is not just a sentence, it is a psychological signal. It reveals something about perception, emotional conditioning, self-worth, and how your brain has learned to navigate other people. So let's start with the most important thing. Chronic apologizing is often a form of threat management. That sounds intense, but it is actually a very normal adaptation. Your brain is constantly scanning for signs of social danger, not just physical danger, but social danger, disapproval, rejection, conflict, criticism, withdrawal, tension, embarrassment, shame. For human beings, these things matter deeply. We are social creatures, and for most of human history, belonging was directly tied to survival. So the brain treats social friction as something important. Some people learn early that the best way to stay emotionally safe is to become less disruptive, less demanding, less visible, less difficult, less likely to trigger anger or disappointment in other people. And one of the fastest ways to do that is to apologize preemptively. In other words, sorry becomes a shield, not because you actually caused harm, but because your mind has learned that softening yourself reduces risk. This is why the habit can become so automatic. You are not sitting there consciously thinking, let me lower myself just in case. It happens faster than that. It becomes procedural, almost like muscle memory, a social reflex. The same way some people automatically laugh when they are nervous, or go silent when tension enters a room, or start over-explaining when they feel misunderstood. Your apology may be your nervous system's way of saying, please don't turn this into a problem. Please don't be upset with me. Please let me stay connected to you. Please let me remain safe here. And that hidden reason often begins much earlier than people realize. In attachment psychology, early relationships teach us what closeness feels like, what conflict means, and what we need to do to maintain connection. If you grew up in an environment where affection was consistent, emotions were allowed, and mistakes did not threaten love, then apologizing could remain what it is supposed to be, a thoughtful response when harm has actually occurred. But if love felt conditional, unpredictable, or easily disrupted, your brain may have built a very different model. Maybe a parent was easily irritated. Maybe a caregiver became cold when disappointed. Maybe the emotional climate of the home was unstable, and everyone learned to walk carefully. Maybe your feelings were dismissed as too much. Maybe conflict lasted too long. Maybe silence in the house meant danger. Maybe being good was not just praised, but required. Children are remarkably intelligent in these environments. They become experts in reading tone, facial expression, and shifts in mood. They develop acute social perception. They learn the signs. They notice what sets people off. They study what calms people down. They discover, often without words, that minimizing themselves keeps the peace. This is one hidden reason some adults apologize constantly. They are still using a strategy that once made perfect sense. That is an important point, because many people shame themselves for this habit. They think, why am I like this? Why can't I just speak normally? Why do I act guilty all the time? But when you understand the psychology underneath it, the behavior stops looking irrational. It starts looking adaptive. Not ideal, perhaps, but understandable. And that shift matters, because the moment you understand a habit as protection rather than defect, you stop fighting yourself with contempt. You begin with curiosity instead. And curiosity is where real change starts. There is another layer to this, and it has to do with self-esteem. People who apologize for everything often carry a subtle, persistent belief that their needs have lower priority than everyone else's. This belief is not always conscious. In fact, it usually isn't, but it shows up everywhere, in how hard it is to ask for help, in how uncomfortable praise feels, in how quickly guilt arrives after setting a boundary, in the urge to explain your no until it sounds acceptable enough to deserve respect, in the fear that if you inconvenience someone, even slightly, your value decreases. Psychology has long studied the relationship between self-worth and social behavior. When self-esteem is fragile, people often become highly sensitive to signs of rejection. Researchers sometimes call this rejection sensitivity, and it can shape everyday habits in powerful ways. If your mind expects disapproval, it begins protecting you before disapproval even happens. That is where chronic apologizing often lives. You apologize not only because you think you did something wrong, but because some part of you has learned to assume that you probably did, even in neutral situations. Someone takes a while to text back, and you wonder whether your last message was too much. You ask a coworker for clarification, then immediately say sorry for asking. You express hurt, then feel the need to apologize for being emotional. You state a preference, then rush to water it down. This is not just politeness. This is perception filtered through insecurity. And when that pattern goes on long enough, it can become part of your identity. You stop noticing it as a behavior and start experiencing it as personality. You tell yourself, I'm just overly nice. I'm just awkward. I'm just anxious. I'm just a people pleaser. I'm just someone who says sorry a lot. But identities can hide mechanisms, and mechanisms can be understood. One useful way to understand this is through the fawn response. Most people have heard of fight, flight, and freeze, but trauma psychology has increasingly paid attention to a fourth pattern, fawn. This is when a person manages threat by appeasing it, by being agreeable, accommodating, soothing, helpful, compliant, or emotionally self-erasing. The goal is not deception. The goal is safety. If fight says, I will confront the danger, and flight says, I will escape the danger, and freeze says, I will disappear from the danger, fawn says, I will become what the danger finds easiest to tolerate. That can include apologizing before conflict even begins. Again, not because the person is manipulative, but because the body has learned that harmony is safer than honesty, and pleasing is safer than risking disconnection. This is especially common in people who grew up around criticism, emotional volatility, controlling personalities, or environments where their internal world had to be edited to keep relationships stable. And here's the painful part. The habit can follow you long after the original environment is gone. Your adult life may be full of decent people. Your partner may not be angry. Your friends may not be judging you. Your boss may simply be busy. The room may be safe. But your nervous system does not only respond to what is happening now, it also responds to what it has learned to expect. That is why you can know, intellectually, that you did nothing wrong and still feel the urge to apologize. Cognitively, you understand the situation, but emotionally, your system is running an older script. This split between knowledge and reaction frustrates a lot of people. They say, I know better, so why do I still do it? But the answer is that insight and conditioning are not the same thing. The thinking mind may update faster than the emotional brain. The emotional brain is slower, more repetitive, more loyal to past experience, which means if apologizing became associated with safety, acceptance, or reduced tension, your body may continue using it long after it stops serving you. There is also a social dimension that makes this habit even more invisible. In many environments, over apologizing is rewarded. People interpret it as kindness, humility, emotional intelligence, or warmth. And sometimes it does create smoother interactions. It lowers friction. It makes others comfortable. It presents you as easygoing and self aware. But there is a hidden cost. When you apologize too often, you can slowly train both yourself and others to treat your presence as negotiable. Your words lose firmness. Your boundaries sound optional. Your requests arrive wrapped in guilt. Your opinions seem less certain. Your pain appears less valid because even you seem to be asking permission to have it. This is how a survival habit can quietly damage self respect, not all at once, not dramatically, but in tiny daily moments. Every unnecessary apology reinforces a subtle message inside the mind. I am the probable problem. I should reduce myself. I need to earn softness. I should enter carefully. I should leave no mess. I should not need much. That message shapes behavior, and behavior shapes identity, which means a small word, repeated often enough, can become a worldview. Now, to be fair, not everyone who apologizes constantly has deep trauma or severe anxiety. Human behavior is more nuanced than that. Sometimes this habit grows out of cultural conditioning, family communication style, gender expectations, workplace dynamics, or social learning. Some people were simply surrounded by others who apologized all the time, and they absorbed the pattern. But even then, the same psychological question remains. What function is this serving? Because habits survive when they work. Maybe your apologies help you avoid awkwardness. Maybe they make you seem harmless. Maybe they reduce your fear of being misunderstood. Maybe they give you a sense of control in uncertain social situations. Maybe they allow you to express concern without risking direct emotional exposure. For example, sorry is often easier than vulnerability. Sorry I'm being annoying can really mean I'm afraid you'll reject me. Sorry for talking so much can mean I'm scared I took up too much space. Sorry, this is probably dumb can mean I want to protect myself if you judge me. Sorry I'm upset can mean I learned that my feelings become acceptable only when I first make them smaller. That is the secret architecture of many apologies. Beneath the word is often a fear. Beneath the fear is usually a memory. Beneath the memory is a conclusion about what it takes to remain connected. And this is where many people have an important realization. They were never actually apologizing for the present moment. They were apologizing for the possibility of being unwanted. That is a completely different thing. And once you see that, a lot of your past behavior may begin to look different. The excessive politeness, the people pleasing, the difficulty with conflict, the overthinking after conversations, the loneliness that appears even in social settings, the quiet habit of monitoring everyone else's comfort while losing contact with your own. These are not random personality quirks. They are connected behaviors. They often grow from the same root. A person who apologizes for everything is often someone who has become highly skilled at emotional anticipation. They can sense shifts quickly. They notice tension before others do. They pick up on tone, pacing, facial changes, pauses. They are often thoughtful, perceptive, and deeply socially aware. In that sense, this habit is not a sign of stupidity. In many cases, it reflects intelligence, a form of adaptation, a mind that became sophisticated at reading the social environment. That is why this pattern can be especially common among people who are sensitive, anxious, introverted, or emotionally observant. The problem is not that you learn to read the room. The problem is that you may have learned to disappear inside it, and there is a big difference. This is the emotional turning point for many people, because for a long time, they assume the issue is that they are too much, too emotional, too awkward, too needy, too sensitive. But often the deeper truth is the opposite. You may have become an expert at becoming less visible, less disruptive, less honest about your own experience, less likely to upset the system around you. And that can make relationships look peaceful while leaving you quietly exhausted. There is a particular kind of fatigue that comes from chronic self-adjustment, from constantly editing your words before they leave your mouth, from rehearsing messages, from softening requests, from apologizing for feelings before expressing them, from carrying the invisible labor of making sure everyone else remains comfortable. That fatigue is real, it is psychological, it affects mood, self-trust, and even memory. When the brain spends so much energy managing threat and social impressions, less energy is available for spontaneity, creativity, and rest. You become careful in places where you should be free. And here is another hidden consequence: resentment. Not always loud resentment, often quiet resentment, the kind you barely admit to yourself. Because when your behavior is organized around being easy, accommodating, and self erasing, your unmet needs do not disappear. They wait, they accumulate, they turn into tension, sadness, numbness, or sudden irritation that seems to come from nowhere. But it does not come from nowhere. It comes from the part of you that is tired of apologizing for being human. This is why understanding the reason behind the habit matters so much. If you only focus on the surface behavior, you might try to force yourself to just stop saying sorry. But if the apology is performing a safety function, removing it without addressing the fear underneath can make you feel exposed, guilty, or even unsafe. Real change usually begins one level deeper, not with the word, but with the belief. What am I afraid will happen if I do not apologize here? What am I trying to prevent? Whose reaction am I expecting? What old experience does this moment resemble? Do I actually believe I have done something wrong, or do I just feel the familiar anxiety of taking up space? Those questions are powerful because they move you from automatic behavior to conscious awareness, and awareness changes the rhythm of the mind. You begin noticing the difference between guilt and anxiety, between kindness and self erasure, between accountability and preemptive submission, between healthy empathy and over responsibility. That distinction can quietly transform your life because many people who apologize constantly are carrying responsibility that does not belong to them. They feel responsible for other people's moods, comfort, disappointment, confusion, and even boundaries. If someone is quiet, they assume they caused it. If someone seems stressed, they try to become smaller. If conflict appears, they search for their fault first. This pattern is common in people who are trained, directly or indirectly, to become emotional managers. But no one can sustainably carry that role without losing contact with themselves. You are not responsible for preventing every flicker of discomfort in the people around you. You are not rude for having needs. You are not difficult for setting limits. You are not selfish for speaking clearly. You are not wrong for existing without a disclaimer. That may sound obvious, but for a person whose nervous system learned otherwise, it can feel almost revolutionary. And this is the part where understanding becomes repair. A healthier form of self respect does not mean never apologizing. It means apologizing with precision. It means using sorry when harm was actually done, not as a ritual offering to secure your right to exist. It means replacing reflexive guilt with accurate language. Instead of sorry to bother you, maybe, do you have a minute? Instead of sorry, this is probably a dumb question. Maybe, I want to clarify something. Instead of sorry, I'm so emotional, maybe, this matters to me. Instead of sorry for the long message, maybe, thanks for reading. Instead of sorry, can I ask for help? Maybe, I could use your help. These are small changes in language, but they are not small psychologically. They reshape self perception. They teach the brain that directness does not equal danger, that needs can be expressed without shame, that clarity is not aggression, that taking up social space can be normal. And normal is an important word here because one of the most healing things psychology can offer is not just explanation, but normalization. So let's say this clearly: if you apologize for everything, it does not mean you are broken. It does not mean your personality is weak. It does not mean you are incapable of confidence. It often means you learned, intelligently and very early, that safety lived inside carefulness. That strategy may have been necessary once. It may have protected your relationships. It may have reduced conflict. It may have helped you survive emotionally. But a strategy that was once brilliant can become limiting when it outlives the world that created it. And that is the real shift: to recognize the habit, to understand the hidden reason, to respect the adaptation, and then to gently update it, not with self criticism, not with shame, not with the harsh demand to become fearless overnight, but with practice, a pause before the automatic sorry, a question about what you are feeling, a little more tolerance for the discomfort of being direct, a little more trust in your own right to exist without pre apology, a little more compassion for the part of you that still expects danger where there may now be none. This is slow work. Nervous systems do not change because they are scolded. They change through repetition, safety, and new experiences that contradict the old belief. Each time you speak without shrinking, something new is learned. Each time you ask for what you need without apology, something is repaired. Each time you let a silence exist without rushing to fill it with guilt, your body gathers evidence. Each time you choose accuracy over reflex, your self-trust grows, and over time, that changes more than language. It changes posture, tone, relationships, boundaries, decision-making, even memory, because the mind starts recording different experiences of what happens when you are present as yourself. You may still be kind, you may still be thoughtful, you may still care deeply about other people's feelings, but kindness without self-erasure feels different. Empathy without over-responsibility feels different. Connection without fear feels different. And perhaps the deepest lesson here is this: a lot of people who apologize for everything are not actually too polite. They are underprotected. They learn to protect themselves by becoming softer, smaller, easier, and more agreeable than they needed to be. And because the behavior looks socially acceptable, almost no one notices the loneliness inside it. Almost no one notices the anxiety. Almost no one notices how much selfhood gets edited out of ordinary moments. But when you understand the psychology, when you really understand why this habit exists, the feeling changes. What once looked embarrassing starts to look meaningful. What once looked like a flaw starts to look like evidence. Evidence of what you adapted to. Evidence of how carefully you learned to move through the social world. Evidence of a mind that was always trying to preserve connection. That deserves understanding, not ridicule. And maybe that is the place to end. Not with a command to stop apologizing forever, but with a quieter question. What if your next unnecessary apology is not a failure, but a clue? A clue about what your body still fears, a clue about what your self-esteem still negotiates, a clue about what old emotional logic still lives beneath your habits, a clue about the part of you that learned to confuse harmlessness with safety. Because once you can see the hidden reason, you are no longer trapped inside the pattern unconsciously. You can begin to choose. And sometimes the first sign of healing is very small. Not confidence, not boldness, not some dramatic transformation, just one ordinary moment where the old sorry rises to your lips, and instead of obeying it automatically, you notice it, you breathe, and you let yourself remain there, unsoftened for a second longer than usual. That second matters, because that is how a habit begins to loosen. That is how self-respect begins to return. That is how your nervous system slowly learns a new truth. You were never meant to apologize for being a person.